Retired Constitutional Court Justice Sisi Khampepe has been appointed the new chancellor of the University of Pretoria. This is going to be with effect from the 28th of June. Now, the university says her legacy is well documented in judgments, including the work of the state capture inquiry. Last year, Khampepe delivered a judgment which we all remember resulted in former President Jacob Zuma being sent to jail for defying an order of the court to comply with the summons to testify before the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. Well, Justice Khampepe joins me now for that discussion. Justice Khampepe, thank you so much for making time to talk to us this morning. Let me start by congratulating you on the new role of being Chancellor at the University of Pretoria. Having lived in a time when black people were essentially not allowed or denied access into institutions of higher learning, what does this appointment mean to you?
Yes. Thanks, Xoli, for that question. As you will know, not too long ago, the University of Pretoria was an exclusive Afrikaner university which set high standards for the benefit of African-speaking students and South Africa's wide community. But today, it is a relatively transformed institution whose diversity caters for all South African students from all walks of life. It is, in fact, one of Africa's top universities and the largest contact university in South Africa. It has the largest intake of black students. It has support in place for its students to graduate on time, as well-rounded, responsible citizens fully prepared for the world beyond university. Its standing as a research-intensive university is growing apace. Consistent with its vision of becoming a leading research-intensive university in Africa, the university has made major research breakthroughs in a number of areas, but importantly, research that matters in transforming lives, communities, and society.
Yeah. Let me pick up on one of the points you are making, and this has to do with the life in these tertiary institutions. I don't need to tell you this, Justice Khampepe, that these institutions have become contested spaces. Over the years, you will know that students have been calling for the decolonization of the curriculum, for example. Now, the role that you are assuming is a huge one indeed. How do you plan to accelerate the pace of transformation, which you have just touched on, but also importantly, what changes do you plan to make within your tenure?
Well, the University of Pretoria, as it stands, is a functioning institution, which I may dare say of true excellence. It has made major breakthroughs in a number of areas. My role is simply to maintain and, where necessary, improve the standard they have set, motivate students and staff to perform their tasks optimally. In short, my role is to be involved with many aspects of this university's teaching, research and knowledge expanding energies, and to unlock partnerships with private institutions and foundations and corporations that are necessary for the existence of the university.
Yeah. Still on the issue of transformation, do you have a view on what we saw recently, which some people hold a very strong view, and I like to think that it is exactly what the people describe it to be, which was naked racism displayed at the University of Stellenbosch by a student, a first-year student, Tiens du Toit, deciding that he was going to urinate on the belongings of a fellow black student, and the remarks from him, it is reported, is that this is what we do to black boys.
Yes, That was quite an unfortunate incident, and it shows that there are still pockets of areas in our institutions that needs to be developed in order to avoid such incidents happening in the future. I think all universities must examine their racism policies to ensure that the incident that happened at Stellenbosch does not happen in their institutions. I intend, when I start my work as a chancellor at the University of Pretoria, I intend to investigate and do extensive inquiries with regard to their racism policy to see where improvements can be done, because what has happened at Stellenbosch has really pushed us back as a country and indicates that we really have areas of investigations that we have to look into.
Let me move on from institutions of higher learning, Justice Khampepe, and try and bring your attention to the country's criminal justice system. And the reason I do that is, on the first score, is that the killing of women and children is a pandemic that does not seem to be subsiding anytime soon. And the criminal justice system, at times, is complicit. And I say that with an even stronger conviction this morning, given what the police minister has been talking about. And he makes reference to the Mpumalanga case of little Bontle Mashiane. She is killed at the hands of a person who was released on parole twice for attempted murder, if reports that have suggested that he was convicted for attempted murder are indeed to be believed. And so this time around, he actually manages to kill a person, and it is the saddest thing ever that it has to be a very young child. In your view, as a person who knows the law, would you advise that family to sue the state?
Yes, I think the state has an obligation to protect the women of this country and the children. It has a heightened duty to make sure that the women of this country are protected. As a constitutional court, we've actually delivered a judgment that points quite clearly that police have a duty to protect women against harm of any sort whatsoever. And the incident of Bontle is an incident in point.
Let me pause there for a second, Justice Khampepe, because when we return, I'd like to ask you the question about how then do policymakers tighten the laws around gender-based violence and, in general, the killing of women and children in this country. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with the recently retired Justice of the Constitutional Court, that's Justice Sisi Khampepe, who has just been appointed to be the Chancellor of the University of Pretoria. And as we went to the break, Justice Khampepe, I just want to make sure that the response I got from you is a clear one, and we are discussing the issues around the murders of women and children in our country, and that it is out of control. The question I want to pose to you next is about how do we tighten the laws of the country. You are a legal person, you're a legal mind, having been in the field for many, many years. But let me start first with that question around the Mashiane family. I saw them being interviewed just last night, and you can see that this is a poor family who absolutely would have no means except to rely on the criminal justice system to bring about justice for the murder of their daughter. You saying that you would advise them to sue the state. Where do they start?
Yes, I think they start by obviously approaching their legal representatives. It is unfortunate that when you are a victim in this country, you still have to expend more financial resources on your side in making sure that you uphold your rights as a citizen. Insofar as the government is concerned, or insofar as the laws are concerned, I think there are laws, the laws are there that are meant to be enforced. The problem is on the part of the SAPS. The SAPS should, in fact, be more proactive in investigating crimes and in ensuring that the citizens are protected from these evil crimes. And there should be more action on the part of the government than mere talking.
And so the policymakers, how do they start tightening the rules around gender-based violence? Why are harsher sentences not seemingly a deterrent?
I think the problem of harsher sentences being a deterrent is an issue that is of great concern, because you'll find that people who are sentenced to harsher sentences, they end up getting paroles and leaving the justice system and rejoining society. So it leaves us naked as a citizenry.
Let me pick up on a question around your previous role when you served on the TRC Amnesty Committee. I'm moving on now from gender-based violence and femicide. I'm talking specifically to the lack of prosecution of apartheid-era crimes. Why do you think this is the case? Do you think that there are politics involved?
Well, I don't know whether there are politics involved, but what I do know is that we cannot, in a constitutional democracy, have people who have perpetrated crimes still roaming the streets of South Africa without any accountability insofar as the crimes they've committed are concerned. I think the TRC Act made it quite perspicuous that there will be no accountability only in respect of those perpetrators who had committed gross violations of human rights if they had been granted amnesty. And in that case, there would be no criminal and civil liability on their part. We as a TRC made recommendations for prosecutions of those perpetrators who were denied amnesty. It is still baffling to me why there were no prosecutions, and we are still sitting in a situation where there is still no prosecution of crimes, particularly of those perpetrators who were denied by the TRC amnesty.
And why do you think the NPA is dragging its feet on these matters, even when they are now directly being petitioned by the families of victims?
It defies any logic. Why up to now the NPA has not taken up the investigation of these crimes. I know there is speculation that they didn't prosecute because of some political interference. But the NPA is an institution that should be above being interfered with politically. And I still have a glimmer of hope that it is not too late for the NPA to do what is right, and that is to prosecute those perpetrators of gross violations of human rights.
And you have been critical around the work of the NPA recently, Justice Khampepe. I'm swaying the conversation now on the fight against corruption in the country. They have been saying that it's a lack of money and a lack of experienced prosecutors. But is that a legitimate excuse from them? Should we accept that as South Africans? I ask you this question partly because you've worked in that office before, and mine is with particular reference to a commission of inquiry, which is the Zondo Commission, that now has concluded its work with the exception of just one final report that needs to be submitted to the president. Why have we not seen a single high-profile conviction since the work of that commission started?
I think there should be no excuses on the part of the NPA to say it doesn't have money to investigate and prosecute and prosecute in terms of its mandate. It would be indeed quite sad in our state of democracy were we to be settled with an institution which is unable to carry out its mandate for lack of funds. I think it is an inexplicable explanation that they have advanced, and it cannot be accepted.
And I'm glad we are talking about the NPA, because here is someone that chaired the Commission of Inquiry into the mandate and location of the now defunct Scorpions unit. You chaired that commission, I think it was between the period 2005 and 2006. And your recommendations were very clear to the ANC that do not disband this unit. And they went against that recommendation. Why do you think that was, in your considered view?
Well, I have not been able to get any persuasive explanation as to why my recommendations were not accepted by the ruling party. The argument that the rationale for the Scorpions no longer holds since the levels of crimes were showing a decline was made quite clear in my report that it was devoid of merit. And for this reason, it was my considered finding that the DSO still had a place in the government's law enforcement plan. And it was my recommendation that the rationale for the establishment of the DSO is as valid then as it was at its conception. So, yes. And
I'm sorry to interrupt you there, because just a few days ago, I sat in the studio with the former NPA head, Bulelani Ngcuka, who was very clear that in terms of the location of the replacement of the Scorpions, which is now the Hawks, the fact that they are placed within the South African Police Service is actually not the right thing to do. If anything, it ought to go back under the NPA. Is that a view that you hold as well?
I hold that view. That was my finding, and I still hold that view.
And so the disbandment of the Scorpions, you will know, Justice Khampepe, that a central figure around why that unit had to be disbanded or its future would ultimately be decided. Central to that was former President Jacob Zuma. Now, knowing what we know today, what would you say is the single most important lesson the country should draw from his presidency?
Don't interfere with a working solution. The scorpions were effective where they were located at the time. They were tackling crime optimally, and they ought not to have been disbanded.
I can't resist the question around the events of July 2021. You will know right now, Justice Khampepe, that the former president is at the Supreme Court of Appeal, having put an application for reconsideration. And one of the arguments that are being mounted by his legal team is that that July unrest, I want to quote directly now, was, and I quote, sparked by a sense of public outrage at perceived injustice that was visited upon Mr. Zuma before a court of law. That talks directly to a judgment that you delivered, which sent him to jail. Do you have any regrets around that? Do you think there were any mistakes made in that majority judgment you handed down?
No. I do not think so. I think it's quite useful to remind ourselves that the lofty and lonely task of the judiciary is to uphold, protect, and apply the Constitution and the law at any and all costs. The corollary duty borne by members of the South African community is to respect and abide by the law and the court orders issued. In that matter, Mr. Zuma did not justify the court order, but he made scurrilous statements about the court and the judiciary at large. The court was obliged to impose the sentence that it imposed based on the evidence that was presented before it.
You've spent many years in the country's judicial system, and you will know the criticism. I don't need to remind you of just how vitriolic the criticism against the judiciary has been. Do you think that it has been justified in certain instances and correct on a score of 1 to 10?
I think there is nothing wrong in criticizing the judiciary as long as the criticisms are based on facts. So far, the judiciary has been under attack and no facts have been brought forward to support the attacks that the judiciary has been subjected to. And in this instance, I must pay homage to many judges across the country who have continued to prove their allegiance to the rule of law and the Constitution. They have demonstrated that they are committed guardians of the Constitution and the rule of law. I would dare say that our judiciary has all the hallmarks of a resilient judiciary that needs to be approbated.
Yes. Justice Khampepe, I have one final question for you. You have worn so many hats during your time. One that you still hold, by the way, is that of the head of the SAFA Ethics Committee. And my sports team here have kindly asked me to ask you this question, whether you have any thoughts on the SAFA elections that are to take place soon, particularly on the back and forth about the process that is involved here, particularly in naming the final candidates. Do you have any view?
No, I don't have a view. As the Ethics Committee, we get contacted and get involved upon complaints that we have received from the relevant authorities.
And so that's where you are going to leave that particular debate, is it?
Yes, regrettably.
All right, Justice Sisi Khampepe, thank you so much for making the time for us, and congratulations once again on your appointment to become the Chancellor of the University of Pretoria. That role she is going to take on the 28th of June.